Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to discuss about the macro initiative point, and specifically in macro initiative there are a major important thing is GDP and economic growth. Many students comes join and ask me the question, what does the GDP mean? Macroeconomics focus on economy as a whole or on whole economy as they interact. Macroeconomic externality occur when what happen at the macro level in different form and inferior to what happen at the macro level. The economy as a whole is massive. Economic indicator. Statistics that measure one or more aspects of the macroeconomics, measure of aggregate production like GDP, measure of employment and unemployment, and measure of inflation like the percent change in the customer price index. Measure index that sum of the inflation and unemployment rate as a measure of how bad the economy is. Goal: economic growth, low unemployment, low inflation framework, aggregate demand or aggregate supply, Keynesian models, neoclassical models, policy tools, monetary policy, and fiscal policy. Goal: in think about overall lift of the macroeconomy, it is useful to consider three primary goals: economic growth, full employment or low unemployment, and the stable price or low inflations. Economic growth ultimately determines the privileged standards of living in a country. Unemployment, as measured by the unemployment rate, is the percentage of the people in the labor force who do not have a job. Inflation is a suitable increasing in the overall level of price. Framework: economy use theories and models to explain and understand economic principle. In microeconomics we use the theories of supply and demand. In macroeconomics we use the theories of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. This book presents two perspectives of on macroeconomics: the neoclassical perspective and the Keynesian perspective, each of which has its own version of AD and AS. Between the two perspectives, you will obtain a good understanding of what drives the macroeconomy. Policy tool. National government have the two sets of tools for influencing the macroeconomy. Monetary policy, which involve managing the interest rate and the availability of the credit. Fiscal policy, which involves changing in government spending or purchasing and tax. What is gross domestic product? Gross domestic product is a GDP, the value of output of all goods and services produced within a country in a year. The measurement of GDP involves counting up the production of millions of different goods and services: smartphone, car, music downloads, computer, steels, banana, college educations, and all of the new goods and services produced in the current year, and summing them into a total dollar value. Take the quantity of everything produced, multiply it the price at which each product sold, and add up the total. In 2016, the US GDP total $18.6 trillion, the largest GDP in the world. Gross domestic product. Final goods and services. Good or services at the farthest stage of their production at the end uh, of a year. This is, they have either been sold to consumer or they are intermediate good or raw materials that have not yet been used to produce final goods. What is counted in GDP? Final goods or services, intermediary goods that have not yet been used in the final goods and services, raw material that have been produced but not yet used in the productions of the intermediary or final goods. What is not included in GDP? Intermediary goods that have been turned into final goods and services, used goods, transfer payment, non-market activities, illegal goods. Calculating GDP. If we know that GDP is the measure of everything that is produced, we should ask the questions: who buys all the production? This demand can be divided into the four main parts: consumer expenditure, investment expenditures, number three, good expenditure on goods and on services, net explore expenditure. Component of US GDP. If you see the US GDP in 2016, there is a consumer expenditures, which is $12.8 trillion, investment $3 trillion, government $3.3 trillion, net worth it's actually minus 0.50. Calculating GDP vocabulary. Durable goods, a goods that has 3 years or more, such as a car and a refrigerator. Inventory, good that has been produced but not yet been sold. National income, include all income earned, wage, profit, rent, and profit income. Knowable goods, a goods that last less than 3 years, such as goods and clothing. Service product, which is intangibles, such as entertainment, healthcare, or product education. Structure, building used as residence, factory, office buildings, retail stores, or for other purchase. Trade balance. Gap between export and import. Trade deficit exists when a nation import exceed its export and is calculating as a import export. Trade surplus exists when a national export exceed its imports and is calculated as export. What is gross national productions? Gross national production include what is produced dramatically and what is produced by domestic labor and business abroad in a year. Include only what is produced within a country borders and what is produced by domestic business and the labor abroad. Subtract out any payments sent home to other countries by foreign laborers and business located in the US. Net national products, GDP minus depreciation. Depreciation, the process by which capital is and losses values. National income, all income to the business and individuals. Personal income, income made by individual. Net national product is calculated by taking GNP and then subtract the value of how much physical capital is owned out or reduce in value because of aging. Over the course of a year, the process by which capital ages and lose value is called depreciation. The NNP can be further subsidized into national income, which include all income to the business and individual, and personal income, which include only income to people. Nominal and real value. Nominal value, an electronic statistics measures using actual market price. Example, nominal value are not adjusted for inflation contract with real value. Real value, an economic statistics measures after it has been adjusted for the inflation contract with nominal value. Comparing nominal and real GDP. If an unaware analyst compare nomination GDP in 1960 to nominate GDP in 2010, it might appear that national output had raised by a factor of nearly 27 over this time. This conclusion comes from the simple growth rate formula. Final GDP minus initiate GDP divided by initial GDP equals to growth of nominal GDP. This conclusion through would be highly measurable. Recall the nominal GDP is defined as the quantity of every final goods or services produced multiples by the price at which it was sold. Sum are up for all goods and services. In other words, nominal GDP is the value of outcome produced. Nominal value of output. Price multiplied by quantity of outputs. Value of outputs equal to price multiplied by x of output. We call the real to nominal formula. Simple growth rate formula. The growth rate of any valuable x over time is the value of x is initial period. Real to nominal formula. The nominal value of the some economic variable is the price level time that real value of that economic variables. So comparing nominal and the real GDP. Nominal output is the value of what produced, while real output is the quantity of what produced. If we produce more apples, we can say our real output has increased. Now support our apply economy. From above now produce two goals, apples and xylophones. Comparing nominal and real GDP. Year 1. The value of apple produced was $1,000. The value of xylophone produced was $1,000. So nominal GDP was $2,000. Yet two. The value of Apple produced was $1,200 and the value of xylophones produced $1,800. So nominal GDP was 3,000. Nominal GDP increased by 1,000 divided by 2,000. It's a 50%. But what happened to the real GDP? Real output of Apple has increased from 2000 ILB to 2182 LBS. Real output of xylophone has increased from 100 to 150. How much has real output increased? So if we comparing the nominal and the real three, what we find? We use price as a common denominators to add quantity of apple and xylophone together. We can choose the price from any years as long as we use this them with each year quantity. Year 1 real GDP, price of apple years 1, quantity of apple year 1 plus price of xylophone year and quantity of xylophone year 1. Year 2 real GDP, price of apple year 1, quantity of apple year 2 plus price of xylophone years divided multiply by quantity of xylophone year 2. In other words, we compute real GDP in every year using the price that existed in a single year. In this case year, that's why real GDP is often described as being based on constant dollar or year $1. Plugging in the value from the table above, real GDP is equal to zero point 0.5 multiplied by 2000, so it will be $2,000 real GDP. So there are more math, like if we comparing nominal and real GDP 5. Real GDP year 2 equals to 259 real GDP. In the other hand, real GDP increased by 29.6%, which is significantly less than the increase in nominal GDP in 50%. So convenient nominal to the real GDP. In order to see how much production has active increasing, we need to extract this effect of higher price on nominal GDP, so that what we left, what is real GDP, the increase in the quantity of the goods and services produced. This can be easily done using a concept known as the GDP deflator. The GDP deflator is a price index measuring the average price of all goods and services included in the economy, covering nominal of real GDP. There are many interesting things we are discussing. We have to understand that how we can go for the further understanding of the different kind of things, how we can move with different kind of aspects, how we can go with a different kind of strategy, how we can move with a different kind of economy and development aspects. And GDP now counting is a one of the major initiative, and by this way we can grow our economy in very effective way. So converting nominal real GDP, the price level is 2010 was almost 6 times higher than in 1960. Clearly, much of the Apple growth in nominal GDP was due to inflations, not an actual change in the quantity of the goods and service produced. In other words, not in real GDP. Recall the nomination GDP can rise in two reasons: an increase in output and or increase in price. What is needed is to extract the increased price for nominal GDP as to measure only change in output. So nominal value of outputs equals to price multiplied by quantity of output. Taking the GDP form of these quotations, nominal GDP equal to GDP deflators multiplied by real GDP. Divide both sides by the GDP deflator. Real GDP equals to nominal GDP divided by GDP deflator. The last part of today's discussions, I do discuss on convert nominal to real GDP as well as business cycle. So what is price index? Is a price index is a two-digit decimal number like 1.0 or 0.85 or 1.25, because some people have trouble working with decimals. When the price index is published, it has traditionally been multiplied by 100 to get integrated number like 185, 125. When we deflate nominal figure to get real figure, we also need to Remember to divide the published price index by 100 to make the math work. So the formula becomes business cycle. So business cycle, the relatively short term movement of the economy from recession to expansion. Depressions, and especially length and deep decline in output. Peak during the business cycle, the highest point of output before a recession begins. Recession, a significant decline is national output, typically a minimum of 6 months. Though during the business cycle, the lowest point of output in a recession before a recovery began. So this is the ultimately most important factors of the GDP that we already discussed today. Because in the GDP and other things, we need to understand that how our economy will work right now, how we can fix our GDP, how we can make necessary initiative for our GDP. If we can take necessary initiative and if we can do necessary things, that time we can move forward to the next level. So thank you for today's sessions. If you have any kind of questions or anything, you can ask me. Thank you, everyone.